Boeing's worst nightmare has officially descended. After the horrifying disaster of Air India Flight 171, a high-level investigative delegation led directly by the Minister of the Interior suddenly stormed Boeing's factory. And at the site once considered the technological heart of the global aviation industry, they witnessed a truth no one dared to imagine: Boeing had placed profit above human life. A painful question now looms before the world. Within those seemingly sterile and modern production lines, what exactly is truly happening? Could it be that Boeing itself is tarnishing the golden legacy it spent over a century building? After the horrifying disaster involving the Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner on June 14th, the entire Indian aviation sector was shaken by an emergency directive from the Indian aviation regulator. All Boeing 787 aircraft operating domestically must be inspected immediately. The shock did not stop there. Air India, the airline with the largest Dreamliner fleet in the country, was ordered to conduct a comprehensive safety inspection on all 787-8 and 787-9 aircraft under an extremely urgent deadline of only 2 weeks. While the black box was still being decoded, all technical experts and investigators simultaneously headed to Boeing, South Carolina, the Dreamliner manufacturing plant in North Charleston. This is not only the final assembly site for the Boeing 787 series, but also the central link in a supply chain that had previously been criticized for being problematic and lacking oversight. When the experts and investigators first set foot inside the facility, what unfolded before them was a series of scenes they could hardly believe. Instead of a clean, modern, and aviation-standardized assembly line, they found a factory operating in chaos, under pressure, and in blatant disregard of even the most basic safety protocols. 900 screws, tightened in the wrong direction without nuts, buried deep in the aircraft's fuselage. When the technical team and investigators began inspecting the center fuselage of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, they discovered a terrifying technical error. More than 900 screws used to attach the carbon composite skin to the main structural frame of the aircraft had been tightened in the wrong direction, and worse, without being secured with any nuts behind them. These screws were not located in areas that were easy to observe or access. They were embedded deep within the part of the fuselage that bears the most load during takeoff and landing. If even one of them were to suddenly come loose, the entire midsection structure could collapse, and the aircraft would fall from the sky like a hollow shell with no support. The more they investigated, the more shocked the inspectors became. How could a technical error of this scale bypass all quality control stages? And how many other Dreamliners out there are quietly flying above passengers, with reversed screws vibrating every hour? A chill ran down the spine of the entire aviation industry. Amid mounting questions, Boeing's spokesperson hastily issued a calming statement. The issue does not raise concerns about flight safety, and affirmed that aircraft deliveries would continue as scheduled. But within hours, the director of the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, Mike Whitaker, personally arrived at the plant to inspect the situation, revealing the severity that Boeing was attempting to downplay. Unable to hide his anger, Whitaker described the initial findings as alarmingly serious and criticized Boeing for lacking transparency, evading responsibility, and continuing to operate under a dangerous corporate culture. If Boeing cannot reset its own standards, we will do it for them. And that could mean suspending deliveries or suspending flight certification. But what left the entire investigation team in stunned silence was the final truth: a series of components that should never have passed inspection had been labeled quality approved and installed directly onto commercial aircraft. Warped and fractured components, still labeled quality approved and installed directly onto the aircraft. But the story didn't stop at reversed screws. When the inspection team expanded their scope deeper into the inner structure of the Boeing 787, they uncovered something even more disturbing. Multiple faulty components, especially hydraulic tubes responsible for flap control and landing gear systems, were visibly deformed. Yet instead of being rejected, these parts were still assembled onto the aircraft as if nothing was wrong. Why did this happen? The answer lies in 2 words: delivery pressure. Internal reports and employee testimonies painted the same picture from conference rooms to assembly lines. Delivery deadlines were the absolute command. Engineers were pressured to keep the line moving and avoid any delay at all costs. A few stood up and warned that these bent hydraulic tubes could misdirect control signals or even cause landing gear failures. But those warnings were buried under a production system driven by pressure and silence. In a confidential interview, a former logistics manager at the South Carolina plant recalled, "We received hydraulic tubes from secondary suppliers. Some were dented, some showed signs of rust. By regulation, they should have been sent back immediately, but instead, they were just wiped off, re-tagged with a QC passed label. Sometimes they changed the part number. Sometimes they left the damage intact. As long as the new QC sticker was there, it was approved. Not all parts delivered were up to standard. And according to whistleblowers, there existed a highly complex internal process that allowed quality tags to be modified or reissued if there was a directive from higher-ups. They claimed a dented hydraulic tube could still end up in a plane, if Boeing wanted it that way, and now a chilling question emerges. In the Ahmedabad crash, was any of those deformed parts installed without being replaced? If the answer is yes, then this was not a normal accident. This was a foreseeable consequence, the direct result of abandoning safety in pursuit of revenue. But it doesn't end there. From the crash site data, an even more chilling suspicion surfaced. Could razor-sharp metal shards left behind from rushed assembly have crept dangerously close to the aircraft's electrical wiring? If that's true, then the fire wasn't fate. It was the cost of a systemically careless machine. Metal dust, the invisible assassin inside the electrical system. During a deep inspection of the electrical wiring inside the fuselage of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, investigators uncovered a danger that seemed harmless, but had the power to destroy everything microscopic metal particles. These ultra-fine metal fragments, generated during the tightening of bolts and mechanical fittings, were nearly invisible under factory lighting. Yet they silently floated through the flight control wiring, clinging to connectors' terminals, and even penetrating into control circuit boards. A single metal particle, smaller than a needle tip, if it lands between 2 electrical pins, can instantly trigger a short circuit. And if that occurs when the plane is flying at 35,000 feet, the flight control system could collapse in an instant, without warning. John Barnett, a veteran former engineer at Boeing, was the first to raise the alarm about this threat. Throughout his tenure, he submitted multiple internal reports accompanied by images, statistical data, and recommendations to improve the cleaning procedures for electrical systems. But as with many other cases, his warnings were ignored. Only when the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) launched an independent audit and verified every claim made by Barnett were the allegations officially confirmed as true. Only then did Boeing reluctantly revise part of their electrical cleaning procedures, not out of initiative but because they were forced to. However, as many experts admitted, Boeing's culture of ignore to meet deadlines is so deeply entrenched that a procedural update does not necessarily mean procedural compliance. And that leads to a chilling reality: hundreds, possibly thousands, of Dreamliners are still flying above us, carrying an invisible threat, a tiny metal fragment silently resting near control circuits, like a switch waiting to be flipped. Inside the confined space of a cockpit, a short circuit at the wrong place at the wrong time will leave pilots with no chance at all. But what truly stunned the investigation team was Boeing's way of fixing fuselage cracks they didn't repair, didn't replace, didn't report. Instead, they painted over the cracks, as if a coat of paint could seal a spreading fracture and stop a mid-air detonation from within. That is no longer an error. That is the institutionalization of recklessness sealed beneath a thin layer of gray paint. Cracked fuselage, not repaired, only concealed with a fresh layer of paint. When the technical inspection process was only about 80% complete, the investigation team suddenly received an anonymous message. "I once saw a very small crack in the belly of the aircraft fuselage. According to regulations, assembly should be halted immediately and the defect must be logged in the quality control system." But instead, they just sprayed paint over it. This information sent chills down the entire team. In aviation, no crack is ever small. Even one just a few millimeters long can allow cabin pressure to escape, causing a sudden decompression, a deadly risk for passengers and crew. And if that crack continues to grow over time due to metal fatigue, it could rupture at high altitude, leading to total loss of control of the aircraft. Boeing knows this danger all too well, but unfortunately they chose inaction. In 2021, Boeing was forced to halt all deliveries of the 787 Dreamliner after discovering critical cracks in the mid-fuselage. Even Air Force One, the aircraft designated for the U.S. President, was delayed due to the same issue. However, when investigators traced the reports back to the factory floor, what they uncovered was completely contrary to what the internal documents described. No repair records, no technical alerts, no mitigation procedures, only a thin coat of paint applied to mask a structural flaw and to blind the quality control inspectors. A former engineer described it as Boeing operating under a culture of blinding inspectors rather than fixing planes. And that very culture sent hundreds of Dreamliners into the world with cracks buried beneath layers of industrial paint. They met their delivery deadlines, but the bigger question remains. How did they meet them when the entire factory was drowning in night shifts pushed to exhaustion? Endless night shifts, exhaustion traded for delivery speed. At first, the experts only aimed to audit Boeing's technical procedures, but the most alarming issue didn't come from bolt circuits or cracks. It came from the human factor. Through each interview, each quiet testimony from former engineers and current employees, a grim picture gradually emerged. Behind the assembly lines once hailed as symbols of American industry. A former night shift worker at the South Carolina plant recalled, "I once saw a co-worker collapse on the floor after working 16 hours straight. No one was surprised. Instead of rest, we were handed Red Bull. There was no time to recover, just one order: finish before the deadline." Shifts of 12 to 16 hours weren't the exception. The break room for dozens of workers had only one rickety ceiling fan, and when someone raised concerns, the manager's response was, "Planes don't fly themselves onto customer ramps." If we're late, who takes the blame? Why did Boeing push things to such extremes? The answer began to unfold during U.S. Senate hearings and leaked internal reports. Both of Boeing's flagship lines, the 737 MAX and the 787 Dreamliner, were plagued by delivery delays. Many airlines, especially in Asia, where hundreds of backlogged orders remained, were facing aircraft deliveries postponed sometimes into 2026. Faced with client pressure and Airbus's accelerating momentum, Boeing found itself cornered into a race at any cost. According to employee testimonies, the pressure from upper management was unbearable. Workers on the line were forced to skip quality checks, work faster than safety allowed, because only one thing mattered: output. But what horrified investigators the most wasn't written in any official report. It was a culture of silence, ruthless in its quietness, where every mistake was erased, where human beings became acceptable collateral, as long as the aircraft were delivered on time. The two-floor factory, where flaws are fixed in the dark. At Boeing's South Carolina plant, behind the brightly lit assembly lines running 24/7, there exists a place never featured in recruitment brochures and nowhere to be found in official reports. Technicians have a chilling name for it: the basement of conscience. It doesn't appear on any factory blueprint. There are no surveillance cameras, but every night shift worker knows it's real. That's where defective parts, bent components, and mismatched assemblies are quietly taken, repaired in haste, then pushed back onto the main line as if no error had ever occurred. One maintenance engineer speaking anonymously revealed, "We once pulled out a warped hydraulic tube from the fuselage, took it downstairs, heated it up, and straightened it by hand. No documentation, no technical warning, just one objective: don't let the system catch it." Another logistics staff member added, "There was a day when the frame didn't align and delivery was just 2 days away." The supervisor whispered, "Send it downstairs, fix it fast, don't log it." In that space, rules don't apply. Procedures are reversed, and the people working there become silent hands, smoothing over structural sins just to meet a deadline. When investigators learned of the area, one of them remarked, "This isn't fixing errors. This is erasing evidence." And if that's true, then Boeing didn't just hide mistakes. They built an entire floor to legitimize them. In an industry where every rivet must pass 2 layers of inspection, the existence of an off-the-record repair zone is beyond unacceptable. Because if flaws can be reshaped in the shadows, who's to say the entire fuselage isn't just a patchwork of silent corrections? They used their own bodies to force the aircraft's frame into place. As the investigation dug deeper on site, a more alarming accusation was revealed by Boeing engineer Sam Salapieper. "I saw them actually jump onto the fuselage and use their body weight to push the carbon skin panels together," he said. Why would they have to do that? According to his account, many joints on the Dreamliner's fuselage were misaligned, creating visible gaps. Under international aviation, safety standards, such components must be reworked or completely rejected to ensure structural integrity. But at Boeing, instead of repairing or replacing, they chose a shockingly crude method: human force. Hands, knees, and even entire bodies were used like makeshift mechanical tools to press the panels into place. Many engineers who witnessed this found it bizarre, because clearly it was not a proper technical procedure. Yet, ironically, in that environment, the abnormal had become routine. If you didn't go along, you were the one seen as not fitting in. What are the consequences of such practices? Cabin pressure may leak during flight. The skin might tear under stress. Or worse, the mid-fuselage could collapse mid-air. And when you sit on a Dreamliner, have you ever considered that someone once climbed on top of it, bent their knees, and used their entire body to force those panels together? When you hear the wind rushing past your window at 9,000 meters, do you ever wonder, how solid is the thing that's keeping you in the sky? Is Boeing digging its own grave? At this moment, Boeing stands on the edge of a cliff, where a single misstep could lead to an irreversible fall. For decades, Boeing was never just an aircraft manufacturer. They were a symbol, the backbone of American aviation, a name tied to legendary machines like the 747-777, and most recently, the Dreamliner 787, the carbon fiber aircraft once hailed as a flying dream. But now that dream is melting from within the factory walls. Severe warnings have been issued. Cracks on the fuselage left unrepaired, merely painted over. Metal particles drifting into electrical circuits, threatening cockpit failures. Engineers, workers, experts, even the U.S. Congress have raised alarms. But Boeing did not choose to fix. They chose silence. They chose reassurance, and they chose to keep flying under the familiar excuse, deliveries can't wait. The consequences are no longer theoretical. Boeing now faces an unprecedented threat suspension of operations for the Dreamliner fleet. If the FAA or EASA decide to revoke the 787 certification until investigations conclude, the shockwaves will extend far beyond economics to trust to systems, to the foundation of global aviation. It's not just about losing customers. Boeing could lose the right to deliver. And when that happens, every financial forecast becomes meaningless. In truth, Dreamliner sales were already struggling before the recent scandals. The aircraft, once Boeing's $10 billion strategic bet, had already seen delivery halts from 2020 to 2022 due to mid-fuselage cracks. As the production line stalled, Boeing fell behind in the global race. Airbus surged ahead, and major carriers, Emirates Qantas KLM, are seriously considering walking away from the Dreamliner in favor of Airbus. From the 737 MAX disasters to the Dreamliner's battery issues, Boeing has already been forced to halt deliveries, pay billions in compensation, and suffer massive public backlash. But this time is different. The world has run out of patience. If Boeing continues patching over, covering up, and waiting for public outrage to pass, the biggest collapse may only be a matter of time. Because the scariest thing isn't the crash. It's the feeling a passenger has, sitting on board, suddenly wondering, was this aircraft built with precision? Or with a shortcut signed off on paper? Boeing now needs more than empty slogans like, "Safety is our top priority." They need to overhaul inspection systems, enforce rigorous quality checks, and fully disclose all investigation findings and maintenance records. Only then can Boeing begin to rebuild the shattered trust with customers, investors, and the global public. The question is no longer whether Boeing will survive, but how much longer will they stay silent?